Joško, let's get started.
Okay.
Welcome. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about my experience and hopefully incentivize someone to start thinking about similar things.
That's a very good idea. I love the preparation with you and your inputs and also the research I did. And what interested me, especially when preparing for this conversation, was your exciting path from science, studying in Europe and in Canada, then surprisingly to forecasting, and then into venture capital, and from there into backing companies basically in industrial biotech and sustainability. And underneath that, I think sits a bigger question for me. How does an experienced investor actually think when decisions have to compound over long cycles in the physical world? And I think it would be a good starting point to jump right into that. And my first question to you, if from your exciting background, from all you did, if you had to choose just one story that best captures why you do this work today, what story would you choose?
Okay, so I would take you back to year 2000, and it's January 2000. To be specific, it's the 21st of January 2000. I'm
Yeah.
living in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, which is on the eastern Atlantic coast of Canada. And there's a big storm coming. And as you mentioned, at that time, one of the things that I was doing, I was trying to predict on a daily basis storm surge. This is the effect of storms and weather on the ocean and how the sea level is going to rise or fall as a result of that. So when you have a big storm, depending on how it propagates and where it goes, it can cause quite a bit of damage. And so the day before, my model predicted the 1.5 meter higher sea level than usual one for some places along the coast of Bay of St. Lawrence, in particular, Prince Edward Island, which is one of the provinces in Atlantic Canada. And so the thing that you can do is you use that result to alert different people in different organizations to take measures that they can take to protect property, towns, and so on. Okay. And so the day comes, and at that time, the whole concept of working from home was not necessarily ingrained in us as it is today. But I did have to work from home because there was so much snow that you couldn't get out of the house. Okay,
Oh,
so I connect myself to the computer system through a modem at that time, and I realize that the actual prediction exactly follows what happened in the nature, which on one hand, for somebody whose job at that time is to predict the future, is a great satisfaction because you nailed your prediction. But at the same time, you learn the day after that the nature actually caused destruction, affected the coastal communities. Certainly, some of the help that I provided by alerting them earlier about it was useful, but it still didn't make a significant difference. So that's where you realize that in front of the nature and the fact that you are able to predict what's going to happen, you still, in a way, in a situation where you couldn't do anything to change that. And that's in a way what influenced me to perhaps start working on trying to address some of these problems in the real world so that we can, in the future, ideally, slower the climate change and find ways to do things differently that are more friendly for the environment.
it's a fantastic story. There was one point that I find very interesting. You said you were not satisfied with the situation and you wanted to change something. While I'm here in Europe, in Austria, I can imagine that many people just say, okay, it's just the way it is. Why should I do something? You can't change it anyway. What sparked that? What motivated you to say, no, that's not sufficient. I want to do something against this.
I mean, in a way, it's the feeling of helplessness, right? Because
Mm.
you are facing a natural result that you predicted, okay? At the same time, you couldn't do anything about it. Like you couldn't tell everybody run for the hills, okay, or pick up your house and move somewhere. So that's really the motivation that time that makes you think, okay, what are other things that I could be doing that can hopefully impact these kinds of situations in the future?
That's a good starting point. And there are many ways forward. At one point, you decided that allocating capital is the right thing. When was the first moment in your life that you realized that investment is the way to go?
I wouldn't attribute that to a particular moment. Okay, I was lucky and privileged to work on my research and thesis work during the period of internet craze. Okay, and that was compounding our collective exposure to a number of things. First of all, we were starting to be connected. Okay, we had access to information. We were not just reading the newspaper or watching the TV to get access to information. We were using internet. So that was a big change for all of us. Secondly, we were bombarded by stories about startups, technology, innovation, entrepreneurs, financing, and all of that. And it's very hard to escape that virus, if you want, when you are watching it or following it on a daily basis. And then the privilege that I had was that working in academia, we were the first ones who had internet, good quality computers, and all that. So it even further accelerates your interest in these fields. So that's one element. The other element is, of course, getting a technical education helps to understand certain things from a fundamental point of view. And that all together combined, gave me the desire to start looking at the combination of entrepreneurship, technology, and investments as a way to kind of fulfill the dream of making the world a better place.
Let's stay with one point that you mentioned, the internet, the transition. You said that you exactly in that moment in time, you also had some life-changing decisions to make in your life, and the internet appeared. Can you compare the times without the internet and with the internet? What changed exactly for you thanks to the internet?
Well, I can share a story. So I was finishing my undergraduate studies and trying to think about graduate school. And I was, for a number of reasons, set to decide going to graduate school in North America. So either Canada or United States. And this is early 90s. And internet somehow started in some places, but it was not widely available. So my way to understand what are the programs available and accessible to somebody from half a world away was to go to a library and flip through a phone book like. Some people will not know what phone book is, okay? But it was a big, thick book that had phone numbers, okay? So the same way, there was a catalog of all universities and all university programs at the graduate level that existed in North America. So I would spend endless hours in the library flipping through that and figuring out which ones are of interest to me. Then I would go home. Luckily, in high school, I was forced to learn typing. So I typed up a letter on a typewriter, send it to a different place, and then 3, 4, 5 weeks later, I would receive a brochure with information and so on. Then all of a sudden, internet started showing up, okay? And so we as kind of entrepreneurial students figured out that, well, it wasn't really accessible for us, but there are some shortcuts that we can make to do that, okay? So all of a sudden, we were spending endless hours on computers using other people's accounts that we somehow acquired, okay? Not to go into the details, okay? Reading what was at that time the prelude of what the World Wide Web became. It was called Gopher, okay? And it was a way to look at, again, the same content that I was looking at in the book, okay? Online, okay? So, all of a sudden, you get access to something by a click of a mouse, and it accelerates your access to information. Then, of course, in 95, we got first browsers, and that even further accelerated our ability to get all this information. But there's an anecdote around that. Okay, I was a graduate student in Canada at that time, And coming from Croatia, there were, hundreds of different Croatian students studying all around the United States. And we were all interested in following the news from back home, including sports. So we had a mailing list of about 300-400 people where we shared sports results from Croatia. And I took up the responsibility to be in charge of sports. So I was gathering sports results and in the early 90s, disseminating them by email to different people that were interested in those results. But because of that activity, I became known for some people as a sports journalist. Okay, even though I had nothing to do, I was just relaying information. So when a couple of years later I got married, people said to my wife, "Oh, you married that sports journalist." Okay, so internet makes different things look very different at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And you mentioned telephone books. I almost forgot that this was a thing back then, the yellow pages, to find addresses of companies. There was no internet, no easy way to find something. And then writing a letter. This is also, 5 to 6 weeks time until you get a response.
Yeah.
And today we get impatient when we have to wait 5 minutes until someone responds via WhatsApp.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing time. A good development. You lived and worked in several continents. One in Croatia, Yugoslavia, back then, I think in the 80s.
Yeah.
Germany, France, and in Canada on both sides, the French-speaking and the English-speaking side.
Yeah.
What did you take with you from the different environments that's useful?
I guess what you learn over time, going from one place to another, is adaptability, is the first thing, and appreciation for different points of view. And in a way, understanding and learning over time, and that learning is continuous. it continues today. Okay, I may be older than I was many years ago. Okay, but you still learn something new about a new culture, a new country that you visit, that helps shape the way you think. But so one key thing is that I've learned to appreciate that there are different ways of doing things, and that there is no right and wrong, and that you have to adapt in different situations. And this is particularly important when you spend some time like I did in North America, where, in general, and despite nuances between English and French-speaking Canada, this is still a North American context. There is a uniformity across the continent that has 400 million people. Okay, so I actually experienced some reverse culture shock coming back to Europe, where I had to figure out how to deal all of a sudden with a Dutch entrepreneur that's different, and with a French one that's very different, or the English one. Okay, and all of these things become easier over time when you accumulate experiences in different places.
You said that you experienced the United States and Canada, 400 million inhabitants, so both together, which also partially down to Mexico, as one cultural environment. While you said in Europe, there are so much differences between the UK, between the Netherlands, between Germany, between France. Is this really such a huge contrast?
Yes, I would say yes, especially in work culture and environment, right? There are differences across North American continent and even from town to town, okay? But still, there are certain underlying principles that are generally accepted and do not change, okay? In Europe, there are still big differences, but that's not a problem, okay? That's an element of enrichment for the whole environment, as long as you understand how to work between them. Okay, and that's sometimes challenge for some people in Europe, where they don't necessarily accept that there are other points of view or other ways of doing things that might also be right. There's no right and wrong. There's just a way to do something, and we need to find a common ground to function together.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's another layer of complexity that we have here in Europe, but we can work it out, I think. We can work it out, hopefully. There was one sentence, I think it was on your Sofinnova web page in your personal profile and in the preparation material. You said, if you do not play, you cannot win. When did you form this belief in your life?
I guess it goes back to my sports activities, but maybe this is more of a funny story that I don't remember, but I was told, okay? But it's kind of illustrative of the competitive nature, okay? So I was a 3, 4, 5-year-old kid. I don't remember exactly. I don't remember at all. This is my parents telling me the story, okay? At a kids activity club, okay? And they wanted to organize a singing competition, okay? I have very little to no talent for singing, okay? But I knew some songs by heart, okay? And so as soon as there was an opportunity to compete, I raised my hand and I went up on stage and sang, okay? To date, my mom still makes fun of that scene, okay? But I had no fear at that time. And I guess that whole idea that if you don't participate, you don't have a chance to win is very important one, right? Because it's very easy to be comfortable sitting at home complaining about something and not participating. The moment you start participating, you have an opportunity to make a difference. Small, big, depends on the situation and depends on your luck at the end of the day, okay? But at least you have a chance to do something. If you don't participate, that chance is always zero by definition.
Yeah, that's
And for
true.
me, that's been an underlying element of everything that I do, and I equally approach investments in the same way. When, in particular, one has to make hard choices occasionally when companies don't work. That's also a good criterion to apply in terms of ability to win or not at the end of the day.
This is a very important point that you mentioned. On one hand, if you do not play, you cannot win. And when I think back to my times in martial arts, beginning something means you need to practice at the end of the day. You need to come to practice, you need to do something, and over time you improve. But to become someone like Bruce Lee is another level at the end of the day. And you mentioned in investing, when a company fails, did you find a recipe for this fine line, for this decision making to say, okay, this crew is bound to win. They should participate longer. They just need more time to practice. Compared to those where you say, back to your singing example, you didn't become a famous singer. So I think I can say that confidently that at one point in time you decided, okay, singing is probably not the right way for me. So I do something else. What's the recipe to make this decision to say, keep going, keep moving forward, or pull the plug and get out of it? It's useless. It's not a good decision.
So maybe I'll expand a little bit the question, okay? To provide a lens that is predominant in venture capital, and then I'll come back to the specific point. The nature of venture capital decisions is very counter human instincts, and so let me explain. Okay, typically humans are wired to help people in trouble, okay, that are weak, that need help. If you go to school, the teacher will spend more time with kids that have problems and less time with kids that are talented, okay, and so on, okay. It's the way we are wired, okay. In venture capital, you actually have to act differently, okay? And I always use a parallel that sometimes gets me in trouble, okay? If you have 3 children, but you have money to send to university, only one of them, which one will you send? The most talented one or the least talented one? So this is a capital allocation, in a way, question, okay? And when you think about that, you will send the most talented one because they have the biggest chance to build on that education and succeed later on. So this is very much how venture capitalist needs to look at a portfolio of companies where some are very successful, some are somewhat successful, and some were not successful. Okay? And that's where this choice of continuing to support those that are very successful needs to become a natural instinct. So this is all to put it in context. So now to answer your question, what do you do with the ones that are not working? This is the famous expression of pulling the plug, as we say. Okay? And that can be done in different ways, right? Because to make a link to this whole topic of playing or not playing in order to win, the fact that you did not win, right, sometimes doesn't mean necessarily that the underlying concept, technology, or whatever the case might be, is not something that could provide a win at a later time. Okay, but the problem is that you have certain time constraints. You need to make choices within a portfolio, and therefore you need to let that go. Okay, but what some people, in my view, do wrongly, okay, when that moment happens, they want to pollute the entire story. Okay, instead of allowing whoever wants, okay, entrepreneurs, a new party, and so on, to continue the journey. Okay, and hopefully one day prove you right, in a sense that you did make the right bet initially. The timing was off, and many other things may have been off. So therefore, you did not make any money from an investment point of view. But at least the company ends up being successful many years later because you allowed for, let's call it, a reasonable transition into somebody else's hands. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I like this point that you made to not pollute the process. So when you come to a decision that probably the team is not winning. Also, I understood your point that you also imply you can be wrong, that your judgment must not be the right one and the team can later on win and you don't pollute the process. Is this the right understanding?
Well, with the nuance, okay? We are not in complete control of our destiny. That's first of all. When I say we, I'm talking about investors, right? Because investment funds have their lifetime, and therefore they are obliged at some point to make decisions that may not be of their choosing, but they're just the nature of the industry. Okay, and so you, in a way, make a decision that you want to get out of an investment because you did not fulfill the plans that you had. Okay. But at the same time, you allow other people to continue. So it's not necessarily about being right or wrong there. It's about different set of circumstances that you encounter, in a particular moment during the evolution of a company.
That's very diplomatic. I love the point. I have to remember this for the future. It's really a good point. There's another point in your life that you mentioned already, and maybe we can dive a little bit deeper into that. Journalism. Sports and competitive basketball. How did you discover that?
I guess your height, influences a little bit your choice of sports. And then I was growing up at the time when in my country, that was by far sports number one. Okay. And so there is this, follow the crowd element where, in high school, I would be spending, 2 or 3 hours per day playing, outside with friends, and then additional 1 or 2 hours in formal practice. Okay, so this is, a huge investment of time plus school, but it's exciting. You're young and you like that, and you learn a lot from competitive sports in the sense that you learn how to work with other people, which is very important. You learn how, especially in team sports, you're not necessarily number one. Okay, there may be other people that are better than you. You may get less playing time, and you still have to be part of the team and accept that as part of the journey. And then you also learn how to lose. Okay, because it's not easy to be winning all the time. I don't remember. I read a couple of months ago an interview with Roger Federer, who was saying that he was only 52%, successful in his shots. Okay, this is one of the most successful tennis players ever, who was only successful 52% of the time. Okay, so when you put that into a context of many other things that we do in life, sports teach you a lot about humility and how to manage situations that are sometimes difficult, but you have to accept and move on. And so if you have a chance as a young person to experience that, you don't realize the value of that for the next 15, 20 years, okay? But then later on, you actually think back and you say, oh, this was, an important element in my upbringing to allow me to behave differently, maybe in some situations later on.
Yeah, sports is definitely a good school for young people. I didn't know that basketball was so big in Croatia back in the
Yeah, so I mean,
80s.
in the 80s, Yugoslavia at that time was second best to Americans.
Really?
Yes.
Why was did you ever research why was there so an emphasis in? I always thought
I
Europe
mean,
is always soccer.
yeah, so it's hard to explain. Sometimes, like I said, it's a result of success that then feeds other success and
Mhm.
kids choosing that career. There was also the fact that there were some very successful players. So I was growing up next to people like Dražen Petrović, who was one of the pioneers of European basketball in the NBA. Unfortunately, died in the car crash 1993. Okay, Toni Kukoc, Vlada Divac, Dino Radja, and so on, who made it to the NBA, which was by far before that an untouchable space for any foreigner, let alone Europeans. So all these people that were a couple of years older or my generation made a big impact on everybody by being successful across the board in the US eventually in 90s.
That's great. You mentioned that you learned a lot of valuable stories as a pro basketball player. When you have to choose just one, what's the most important learning from basketball that is useful for you as a venture capitalist?
It's a hard one because sports in general are instant gratification. You win or lose. Okay, you're part of a championship that over, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 months eventually yields a champion. So you win or lose that championship, but it's still relatively short term. Venture capital, you have a lot of small battles that you win or lose along the journey, but that journey is way longer. Okay, so if there's one thing you can bring from sports to venture capital, it's patience. Because even though sports allow you for instant gratification, you still need to be patient in many aspects to be successful in the long term.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's move over to your journey from scientist and pro basketball player to capital allocator. Another question around that. You have a lot of experience in that field with Sofinnova. What do scientists most often misunderstand about venture capital?
I would say the key challenge for scientists and venture capital is operating with partial information. Okay, so as a scientist, you are trained to chase the truth. Doesn't mean that every scientist comes to the absolute truth 100% of the time. Okay, but your training is such to keep digging, keep trying to find ways to prove something to be undoubtedly correct. Okay, venture capital, and the earlier stage it is, the more pronounced that challenge is. You need to operate with so many unknowns, yet make decisions. And so two things become problematic for scientists. First of all, the fact that you don't know so many things. Okay, so you are trained to do a lot of work, research, and come up with some conclusions. In venture capital, you do some research and you do some hard work, okay? But you have to stop at some point in time and make a decision, okay? And so that the second part, decision making, is also something that's not necessarily ingrained in scientists because they don't have to make, I mean, they have to make decisions on, experiments that they're doing or something like that, okay? But it's not something that's continuous. In venture capital, you have to, I won't say daily, but relatively frequently make decisions one way or the other, go, no go, assume the responsibility and move forward. So those two elements are the most challenging one for scientists that come into venture capital. And I have always seen as my responsibility when working with junior members of the team that come from science background to help them bridge that gap, teach them how to navigate that, and hopefully make out of them one day successful investors.
How was the transition for you? I mean, I can imagine when you said you work as a scientist and are trained to gather all the data and make a decision based on all the data you have, and be a little bit of a perfectionist, and then suddenly you work in an environment where people say to you, you will never have all the information, make a decision now. How was that personally for you, this transition from the scientist to the capital allocator?
So I had another, but also complicated. Okay, my first experience in venture capital was working with university-based technologies. I was working in a fund that was helping initially to commercialize university-based technologies. So you are dealing initially with people that are very much similar to you in terms of background, okay, yet don't have this different angle of responsibility. So you need to, on one hand, bring this new way of thinking to them and allow them to be more rigorous about what they're doing. But on a personal level, you relatively quickly adapt to that if you have good colleagues. And I was fortunate in my career to always have good colleagues who were able to teach me, for lack of a better word, how to think about that. And I still remember in my early days in venture capital, one of my colleagues always telling me, use the test, would you put your own money into it? Okay, because that's the ultimate test to tell you, is this good or not really?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. I think you mentioned tech transfer. You working for a fund that basically commercializes or tries to move forward scientific results from universities and research organizations. I mean, research organizations are usually focused, of course, it's in the name, research and science. And then you spin them out into a development company. How do you as an investor make sure that this team doesn't get stuck with science and just operates like a scientific lab in a corporate shell, but really starts a trajectory into a development company? What's your secret sauce here?
Well, I think it would be too arrogant to say that there is a secret sauce. Okay. First thing to realize is that every single situation is different in itself. Okay. And it's different because it includes different people, sometimes different topics or different types of science. So once you realize that, there are some things that are important. It's a kiss of death to leave a scientific team alone without people that have experience in commercial development. So while you need a strong R&D team at the early stages of the development of a company, you want to complement them with somebody who has gone through that same journey in a commercial context. And I still remember to date an investment in a company here in Paris some years ago, where the team was excellent scientifically, okay, and then as employee number 10, okay, they hired somebody who was a little bit older than them and had experience in commercial context, and it transformed the company positively. Right? And so that element of understanding how to introduce people that are similar yet different or come from different experiences is very important in getting these companies on the right track. The other element, which becomes on the human level more complicated, is to have a conversation early on with scientists that may be involved in the company in early days about when they will drop off. Because depending on the nature of the company and on their interests, they may not be there forever. Okay? And it's sometimes better to have that conversation earlier rather than later to avoid disappointments, and also to plant in a way in their head this idea of not being irreplaceable, okay? Because the company evolution by definition requires people to be not replaced, okay, but complemented with other talents so that the company can progress on this journey from unique technology in R&D context to, a commercial machine that's selling and making money many years later.
I find that point extremely interesting because, in my opinion, it makes the difference between a winning company and a company that gets sometimes stuck. When I look across the board at corporate setup, especially in the early stages, I very often see board members, executives that all have a scientific background and have, of course, this development goal of becoming the next CRISPR Therapeutics, the next Intellia, the next Tesla, depending on the area and the deep tech area they operate in, but actually always refrain from hiring the expertise that's missing. My question to you is, how do you handle these conversations with the people to open their eyes in that direction?
Well, this is first of all part of the due diligence process when you're assessing a potential investment, which, amongst other things, includes, most importantly, the assessment of people. Because you need to understand whether they have the mentality to tomorrow make the hard realization that A, I'm not the right person to continue leading this company or being responsible for whatever the case might be, but need to complement myself with somebody else. So how do you do that? There is a declarative level where everybody will say what you want to hear. Okay, sure, I will leave my job, tomorrow when the board or investors or the rest of the team concludes that I'm not the right person to do so. Okay, that's easier said than done. Okay,
Yeah.
So in that conversation, you need to figure out the level of maturity of that person to really come to that realization, and that brings no guarantees. Okay, that it will happen the way you anticipate, okay? Because in some cases, you find that somebody is, too stubborn, too inflexible, and you decide not to invest because of that being one of the elements, okay? In others, you conclude that, maybe we're on the right track, okay? But then still, there is the moment when that happens, and, execution, maybe not the right word, okay? But, putting in place that change, that is anything but trivial or easy to live, both for the individuals involved and for us that sometimes or oftentimes need to act as catalysts to that decision.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you have coached probably and developed many companies in your life and teams and seen that firsthand. Do you have, I mean, we all want to invest in the next Jensen Huang, in the next Elon Musk, in the next big thing at the end of the day. You mentioned also that you're looking for character traits. Do you have a list, a short list, or do you have a catalog of criteria where you say, okay, this might be the right person to become the next Elon Musk or the next Jensen Huang?
I wish I had. The answer is no. Okay, and I oftentimes I kind of wonder myself, have we advanced sufficiently, both in terms of understanding people and maybe technology, to be able to develop a photo robot of how that person would need to look like? But for now, the answer is no, with some indications. Okay, and the key thing there is the fact that different people work differently with other people. Okay, and so that personal fit is one of the key elements that needs to work out between, okay, in case of my work, investor and founding team. And that's why I often tell CEOs of these young companies, it's not the fact that we like or not your technology. Okay, you need to find investors that you get along with very well. Okay, because that element is very important or critical success factor for later on. And here's why. Because initially, and this position also got me in trouble a few times, okay, investment in a startup is like a marriage that is predetermined with a divorce at some point in time in the future. Okay, and here's why. Okay, because when you get going into an investment, everything is rosy. Okay, you confirmed your investment thesis, you confirmed the team, the market is great, technology is great, your IP protection is great, everything works fine, okay? Then you start going, and then you hit some roadblocks, okay? Something doesn't work, the scale up is more challenging than you thought, it's difficult to raise funds, so there are ups and downs, okay? And so, like in a human relationship, and so in that process, you need to make sure that when downs come, the team that is investor and entrepreneur can function together and weather those storms multiple times over. Okay? Then, when I talk about a predetermined divorce, it's there because investors need to exit an investment, and therefore that relationship will not continue in a professional context. That doesn't mean that we won't continue to be in contact with these entrepreneurs, sometimes become friends and so on, but it's not going to last forever because of the nature of a venture capital investor business.
I have never looked at it this way, and it's absolutely true. An investment is, how do you say, preconditioned divorce? It's already
No, it's a marriage with a prearranged divorce.
Prearranged divorce, a marriage
Yeah.
prearranged. Yeah, it's true. I mean, you invest and you need your exit in 5 to 10 years down the road at any then when you diamond won't participate forever. This is
So
detrimental.
once I said this at a conference, and then people came to me back and said, "Do you have marital problems? We are talking this way."
Yeah, you can imagine. I just imagined saying this to a woman or to a wife. I mean, yeah, it's a predetermined divorce anyway, so
Yeah.
it doesn't go. But in business life, it really is, and this is detrimental, I think, to how.
But it's that the importance of the relationship and ability to weather the challenges that is very important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. But I think how many founders understand this when you talk to them, that basically you won't be there forever for them, that your job is to bring them to the next stage and they get out.
It's hard to quantify that, okay? One of the traps, and this goes beyond investing, I mean, this is a human trap, is that we all hope that people will change, okay? But it's wrong, okay? In 99.9% of the cases, people don't change. But we still expect, in particular, working with young people, that we can influence their pattern in a positive way so that they can learn certain things and understand certain things better. And I have a few times succeeded in doing that, many times failed, okay? But working with young entrepreneurs, explaining to them how this relationship between investor and entrepreneur is not a contentious one, it's a collaborative one, how you need to work together, how it's not a win-lose, it's a win-win that we're looking for, and so on. But it's hard work.
It's so against human nature, all this venture capital and entrepreneurship. I just realize when I think about it, the chances of a startup founder succeeding is less than 1% in concept stage.
So,
Then you have to deal with people who tell you, quite frankly, right from the onset, we won't be there for you in a couple of years. And human nature is more going in the direction of being part of a tribe and contributing and being part of that. And at the end of the day, it's rejection, it's failure, and an ever-shifting environment with new people, old people leaving. What does that make with humans, in your opinion? What was your observation? How do they evolve in this environment? It's really, really very special for me.
Yeah, but in a way, you either sink or swim, because there's no in between. So you need to be able to adapt. And going back to kind of different sectors in deep tech, one of the biggest challenges for startups is this ability to evolve the team over different phases of the development. Scientific research in an early phase, then product development, then scaling up to industrial production, okay? Then actually running operations, right? And commercializing, all ask for very different skill set over time, and makes it nearly impossible to do that in a perfect manner, okay, where you phase in and phase out the right skills. Okay. the other challenge you have is that people that are there, they think, oh, I can jump to the next level because, you know, I'm smart and I understand all that. Okay. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't work. Okay. So you need to bring new talent to the company. And so that continuous evolution in a deep tech company happens across many different elements that I just described. That is non-trivial. If you contrast that to a pharma biotech startup, okay, that essentially, okay, no offense to anyone, remains R&D until it gets acquired. Okay, it goes through different phases of preclinical and then clinical development. Okay, but never needs to think about margin, production, operations, or let alone selling to someone. Okay, I mean you need to sell the story and the company. Okay, but not something concrete. Okay, so in the deep tech, you have to cover all these things. You have to cover them in a reasonable timeline, and it requires a very different skill set that you need to bring in and out so that the company becomes successful.
Let's stay with the skill set. What skills, in your opinion, on the executive board level are necessary for a deep tech company?
I think it's clear from what I just talked about is that they vary over time. And so initially, they are good project management skills and ability to communicate. Okay. So no matter the stage of the development, storytelling is a critical success factor, and it gets underestimated. Because at the end of the day, we investors, tomorrow acquirers, or public markets, or so on, are all humans that buy or not a story. Okay, the story needs to be substantiated with margin, unique technology, intellectual property, and so on. But at the end of the day, it's about the story. Okay, and if somebody can capture your imagination, you are more inclined to make the sale or to buy. Okay, and therefore for them to be successful in selling that to you. So that ability to communicate is very important across all stages of the company. Okay? And then as the company progresses, we need people that have experience in operating what I would call, for simplicity, a more serious company, meaning more people, deeper organization, and then execution of certain things. Okay, but run a risk, and this is always a risk of bringing people from very big companies that cannot adapt to startup mentality. So one of the first questions I ask when I'm interviewing people, and I always help companies recruit their executive team. So I'm doing interviews on behalf of the board, relates to understanding the level of independence somebody who is high up in some organization has. Okay, like, can you book your own travel? I mean, it's as simple as that, to figure out how independent people are, because tomorrow in a startup environment, everybody has to take the garbage out. There's no, 5 assistants that are going to do that for you. So you need to be skilled in downgrading maybe your level of comfort that you had while embracing all these new things that a startup offers.
Yeah, good points. I like the storytelling point, the first part, which I think, in my opinion, the best example that I know is Apple, Steve Jobs and Tim Cook, the combination. Steve Jobs initially, I don't think he was a good storyteller when I read his biography, but he evolved into that. But also then understood that at one point in time, when he returned to Apple in 1997, that probably the operations part he's not the best fit, and he hired Tim Cook. And I think this combination of Tim Cook and Steve Jobs laid the groundwork for the success of Apple.
There is an amazing book to read if you haven't. It's called Apple in China, that talks about Apple in China, but also explains very well this operational element and the excellence on the operational side that was developed over that period that you mentioned.
I have not read the book yet. Do you recommend it?
Yes, absolutely. For many reasons. Okay, it covers many different things that also. I mean, it's a recent book, and it also resonates with a lot of things that are happening right now.
That's a very good point. I have to read it. I have to read it. There was also one interesting part that you mentioned in in the material. If nobody's willing to buy, it's a hobby. I mean, when we talk about deep tech, from tech transfer to the big success story like Apple at the end of the day, I mean, it's of course Apple now is a sales story. When is the sales skill beyond storytelling? I mean, storytelling also for biopharma, you need to tell the story, of course, to pharma companies and to VCs, but it's not so necessary to sell it directly to patients at the end of the day when they are in the early stages. This sales skills, this distinguishing between willing to buy and treating it as a hobby, getting out and staying in, and how to find customers. When is it necessary to develop this skill set in a deep tech company, in your opinion?
Ideally from day one, okay? And
from day one?
Yes. And maybe the company doesn't have anything concrete to sell from day one, but it needs to keep the conversation open with those that are potential customers for a number of reasons. First of all, going back to communication element, understanding how your story is received, okay? Do people understand what's your value proposition? Is it of value to them, okay? Or do you need to adjust? Because the worst thing is to say, okay, I know what the world wants, okay? Let me hunker down in my garage. 3 years later, I'll come up with a beautiful widget and I'll come to the market and people will buy. Well, maybe they will, maybe they won't. Okay, so this ongoing conversation to understand from your customer set, are these people actually your future customers and are you solving a problem for them, is an ongoing effort. Okay, and so while my point about sales solving everything relates more to actual sales that bring cash, okay. This is still an ongoing process. So now you will tell me, oh, but Steve Jobs presented iPhone without ever doing any market research or understanding that people want a touchscreen phone, and it was a big hit. True, okay. How many millions of other products were trying to get out on the market and did not succeed? Okay. So this element of continuous sales process, even if you have nothing to sell, is very important to gather market feedback, okay? Because that market feedback allows you to adjust what you're developing and adjust your story in terms of what you're selling, okay? And that's ongoing. But ultimately, okay, you need to find somebody who wants to pay for what you do, okay? And so in the deep tech context, as you said, timelines are very long, okay? So how do you still get something while you have nothing to sell? That's one of the challenges. So you can do that by, for example, signing collaboration agreements with big companies, okay, that are willing to finance part of the development for something that is of interest to them, or some other form of collaboration that will bring money in, okay, that's not selling a product, but it's still selling the aggregate knowledge that you have in the company around a potential product that will come later on. So you're getting validation from the market because nothing validates what you're doing better than cash.
Yeah, I agree. I think also Steve Jobs was proficient in that. I think I don't buy this. He did not really do market research and anything of that. Just put it out. I think he was a genius in understanding what people want, but not asking them how their solutions would look like. But when I look at the deep tech founders, I can imagine when they hear your words right out of university and into their first company, they just might say, well, I mean, we are scientists, we have science, and why should we go out on the market and sell to someone? It's still 10, 15 years away from the market. Why should we focus on sales? What's your answer to them?
I mean, I still remember the words of a scientist at one point in time where he told us, we've developed everything. You just need to sell it now. Okay. It's like, no, I think it's natural for technical people that are focused on that part of the development process to underestimate what needs to happen later. Okay. And so it's our job in a way to bring that understanding to them by describing what are the elements of that process? Mm-hmm. How does, scaling up technology work, what it involves, how much it costs, and so on, so that they can develop an appreciation that, yes, their fundamental steps are critical for the future of the company, but there are so many floors that need to be built in that skyscraper for it to reach the sky.
How do people perceive that when you tell them that? How are the responses?
Well, this also becomes a filter at some point in time, right?
Yeah,
If they cannot really appreciate that and understand that there are many things after them and they will need other people to help them, then probably they're not mature enough for an investment.
Okay, so it's basically then they downgrade themselves as investable asset.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. So it's not only the technology that you're looking at, but very much the team composition at the beginning.
Okay. The saying is the same way in real estate, it's location, location, location. In our business is people, people, people. And it has multiple facets, right? And this observation of their behavior is ongoing, continuously. Okay.
So you as an investor say that also in deep tech, it's not so much about patents, the science, but very much more about the people behind it that drive the company forward.
Let me nuance that a little bit, okay? The patents and science provide fundamental building blocks for a business to be built on top of that. Without it, it's like not having a foundation, right? The building would crumble. So it's very important to have good science and good IP, okay? But without great people, you will rarely succeed, okay? So the saying is that, a B team will probably destroy exceptional technology, but an A team will make a success even of an average technology.
Yeah, that's a good point. Let's stay a little bit here and talk about the relationship between founders, entrepreneurs, and investors, and how you define yourself. I mean, in business schools, it's always very clear. I mean, investors are capital allocators, and when I look at reality, especially during the pandemic, there was this notion that investors are much more. They are your partners. They are not capital allocators only. They also provide the network, their expertise, help the company. And when I speak with founders, very often they say, "Can you also just work for us at the end of the day and invest capital and don't take anything?" How do you define your role as an investor in deep tech?
I mean, your role in a way is the first row cheerleader, okay, of the company, to make it simple, okay. But I often meet young people, coming out of a business school who are interested in venture capital, but they see it as a finance job, okay. And I immediately try to dispel their expectations that this is a finance. The finance involved in venture capital is at the high school level. Okay, sorry to say so, but it's not very, very complicated. So it's very much people's business, and it's very much all these things that you mentioned that help companies succeed. So at some point in time, we are doing business development for our companies because we are meeting other people and we are recommending solutions from our companies. Next day, we'll be meeting people that are, operating contract manufacturing facilities. So we are pitching our companies to these contract manufacturers and vice versa, learning about their capabilities so that we can transfer this information to our portfolio companies. The next day, we are meeting people that are providing, debt solutions, okay? So we quickly understand who could be eligible for this or not, and, transmit that information, and so on. And so in many ways, we are, and this is very important for people to understand, we are always in the back seat of the car. We are never driving the car. And I have met, quite a few entrepreneurs that were lured to become venture capitalists because of their entrepreneurial success. That was phenomenal. Okay? That found themselves disappointed by the fact that they had to be in the back seat of that car. And that's a very difficult discipline to accept, where you are somewhere and you are an investor in a company and you feel that you can do better than the person that's responsible, whose job it is to run that company. And the worst thing you can do is to try to tell them what to do, okay? Because then it's a very difficult situation to navigate. So I've seen quite a few people eventually walk away from an investor job because they couldn't accept this detachment from decision making because they thought that they knew what needs to be done, and therefore they were impatient in sending that message to management teams.
To sum it up for me and to see if I understood it correctly, you define your role basically as more as coaches or mentor to a team when you invest in a company. You see your role as cheerleading the company to CROs, to manufacturers, when we talk about biopharma to clinics, when we talk about sustainability to suppliers from all walks of life to other investors. So you cheerlead the company, but always with the backseat mentality in mind that you say, okay, I can help you tell your story to the market, but actually selling, actually doing the hard work behind it to make the deal happen, that's on you. That's on the entrepreneur. That's not on the investor.
Yes. And one thing that entrepreneurs oftentimes underestimate is what do they get from an investor? Right? You get all of these things that you listed, but they also get the intelligence that comes from the portfolio. Okay? Because many entrepreneurs think, oh, I just need the money, okay, and I will know what to do with it. Okay. Then investors tell them, well, but we are the smart money. Okay, everybody's smart money. Okay, we bring this or that.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
So then, you kind of try to understand who is smarter amongst all the smart money that's out there. Okay. But then the key thing is that we live, 20 lives in parallel, okay, across a portfolio. An entrepreneur has one company that takes 24 hours in their day and has to deliver on that. So they don't have the visibility of what happens when you are in the back seat. But when you are in the back seat, you can be in the back seat or have the view of multiple companies. And those learnings that come from one and can be transferred to the other are highly valuable elements that a single entrepreneur just cannot see because they're heads down trying to execute on their company. And that's the element that I find the most underestimated vis-a-vis investors that entrepreneurs fail to observe.
Let's stay a little bit with the relationship between investors and founders or investors and entrepreneurs with two examples. I mean, that happen quite frequently. One is hiring and the other one is fundraising. So I can imagine that when I have you on the board of a company and I should be the CFO and run the company, that at one point in time we go out and raise funds. How do you define your role as an investor in closing a Series B, Series C? Versus the CFO or the CPO or the CEO in the company.
So our role is in providing connections as quickly as possible. So we go and talk to other investors that we know. We introduce the company. We make the initial sale in a way. Okay. We create a hook. Okay, to put it better. Okay, we create a hook that should ideally intrigue someone that knows us and we know them. Okay. To have a further conversation with the company. I should not be the one trying to sell the business plan of that company, okay? Because A, it undermines the company, and I'm not going to be doing it anyway, okay? So they need to see the team that hopefully shines and is able to deliver that story. Well, how does that work in practice? Okay, well, sometimes I make an introduction, and of course, I'm enthusiastic about all these stories because that's part of my job. But then the team that eventually gets the audience disappoints, right? And so people come back to me and say, "Oh, okay, you sold me this as a much more exciting story, but they were not that convincing." Okay, well, that's the risk if you want, or the trade-off. But that's something that you have to live with. So our job is really creating that initial pool, promoting the company, and then nudging that process as it goes along. Why? Because an incoming investor may not be as open with the company as they may be open with me, and vice versa as well. I can tell them, this team is good, but there's one or two people that may need replacement, and so on. So behind the scenes conversations are equally important to get to a positive outcome in refinancing company where we are already.
Yeah, transferring social capital is not an easy process. It's not just I know you, and now let's work together. There's a little bit more behind it. But I just can imagine. I mean, it's just while you were speaking, I thought how can we put this in a funny angle? And I just thought, okay, when I'm the CFO and the CEO asks me, Christian, how is the fundraising going? And I say, oh, Joško is doing it for us. Said, send me the pitch deck, and he's now making the introductions. Trust me, in 1 month we have the capital on the bank account. And then the CEO gives you a ring and say, hey, Christian told me that you do the fundraising now. What would you reply?
Uh, there's nothing wrong in helping companies, right?
Mm,
But at the end of the day, it's the company leadership that needs to be the face of the company. Okay, and
mm,
that's
mm,
you know, I have colleagues that sometimes misunderstand their position in that process, right? And they try to dominate it. Okay, but again, it comes back to the understanding that tomorrow I will be always in the back seat of the car. I won't be driving the car. So if you create a false expectation in a way by shortcutting the team, you're doing yourself a disservice because you're not really, putting in front those that will execute on that plan. So one has to be very careful in those kinds of situations, not to again try to dominate the process.
So it's always with the backseat mentality in mind, and your expectation also to the team is that they drive the car and that
Absolutely.
they, when push comes to shove, it must be them and not just saying, okay, you as the guest in the backseat, now it's your turn to take the wheel.
Yeah.
Um, when, I mean, fundraising is a good example. The next one is hiring. When you think about the hiring process, you have a tremendous network. You have big funds in the background. You have many companies. You see when companies shut down, and very often probably more helicopter view on the market. How do you see your role as an investor when it comes to hiring in a company?
Couple of places there. So first one is being part of the strategy discussion and identifying where the gaps are.
Mhm.
And hopefully doing that with some kind of 12 to 18-month perspective, not to find yourself in a situation that's we need someone tomorrow. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's first thing. Second thing is then helping spec out how this next hire on the management team would look like. Okay, so understanding who is on the team and how would the description of that role look like so that it best complements the team, so that you don't have too many overlaps. So now you create the French expression is mouton à cinq pattes, so a sheep with 5 feet. Okay, that doesn't exist. Okay, and you go out and try to find that person. It's always better, in my experience, to use a third party in doing that recruitment, unless we have around our network, 3 or 4 very qualified candidates for a particular position. Okay, because the key point is that if you only bring one person along, then there's no counterparty to check against, right? And then the company can say, well, this person is great, okay, but how do I know that others don't look better or worse?
Mhm.
So it's preferable to work with third parties, and then we are part of that process where again the management team drives the show. They talk to all candidates. We have conversations in between, but then board members typically talk to a select few on the short list to provide their opinion how they see this person working with the team, okay, and benefiting the company for the next stage of the development.
Yeah, I like this point that you mentioned. You should not always only talk to one person when you want to fill a position. You should talk to more, and this is the reason why to include a third party like a headhunter, HR company to run the process. I like this 1 to 100 rule. It's not true in all the times, but I think it's a good rule of thumb. When you want to invest in one company, look at 100. When you want to hire one person, talk with 100 potential candidates so that you really get this full picture.
Yes. And so, for example, as we were building our strategy, we got oftentimes challenged, why do you work both in Europe and North America?
Mm.
And the answer was relatively simple, and it resonates with what you just said. You need to see as many things, and ideally you need to see many good things, so that the decision you make to back 1 out of 100 is based on a very good sample of excellence. Okay? And that excellence then drives your choice of investments that ideally are the best among those. You make many mistakes, okay, but sometimes you get it right.
I totally agree. I totally agree. And when I look at Europe, very often there is the notion to just look at a very small region, so at the regional fund. But this leaves out then this pattern recognition at the end of the day.
Yeah, and exposing yourself to how other people think in other places helps you diversify your way of thinking as well. So my objective on all the boards that I've been part of and helping entrepreneurs recruit new board members has been to bring diversity, not in a conceptual point of way, but really different people from different parts of the world, so that they bring another way of thinking, another network, another way of challenging you, so that it enriches the company. And then, sometimes in some countries, not to be named, you have a question of language, right? So, how do we do that? We have to change the language of, it's a challenge, okay? But I think it's for the better.
Yeah, I totally agree. I like this term diversity still. I know there's a little bit of political discussion around diversity, but at the end of the day, you mentioned earlier adaptability. Now I have it. And I think the only way to develop that skill of being adaptable to different situations is exposing a person to different situations.
Exactly.
And diversity is one route to go. Why is currently the term diversity so controversial?
Well, I mean, because it's used in different ways, right? So, I mean, we don't need to get into that discussion. And if it's not that word, it's something else, right? But for boards in particular, the important element is I won't say not to have consensus, but to have enough contentious elements so that it creates discussion, and that discussion often yields better conclusions than everybody agreeing from day one on every single point.
When we go back, let's stay with this point and go back to a little bit earlier, the relationship on a board between founder and investor.
Yeah.
When there is a situation, when everything goes well, there's so very often situations where everyone agrees in the room. I mean, of course, you have revenues coming in and the hires work out well and there is not a single problem. Do you still think it's necessary to induce a discussion on board level to just keep these elements of diversity in the board level, or just go along with the consensus at this time?
Okay. Whenever things are going right, there is something around the corner. Okay, so you need to anticipate what are the risks that can come along. Okay, and then the board is a place both for entrepreneur to kind of step back a little bit and have a more broader view, but then other people that are not in the daily life of the company to provide their insights in terms of what they think. Okay, and consensus is an appropriate way of getting things done. Okay, but it doesn't have to start and end with consensus. Okay, and so this is I had not one but several companies, in particular when working with young entrepreneurs, where they always thought that the relationship between investor or the board and the entrepreneur is a contentious one. Okay, that it's me against them, board controlling them, and all of that, and then the discussion becomes around board composition and who has what seat and all of that. Okay, and that discussion typically comes from not understanding how venture-backed boards work. Okay, or good ones. Okay, they are collegial. Okay, they're about common interests of having the company succeed. Okay, and they're about confronting opinions so that they drive appropriate conclusions. And so I sometimes, and it's abstract for somebody who's never lived that. Okay, for me to try to explain to them that we go into a meeting and we all want to contribute to the success of the company. That's the underlying driving force, okay? And when you think about it that way, then it's not, me trying to control you or anybody else, okay? It's about common denominator, which is success of the company, and everybody doing what they're doing with that conviction. Now, they can think that one thing is better than the other, what the other person is proposing. They need to confront these views, okay? But they're both, if the board is functioning well meant, okay? And that's something that entrepreneurs sometimes don't realize, that people mean well, even if they don't think the same as you do.
Yeah, being disagreeable matters at the end of the day, especially on board level, and making people aware of the risks and the blind spots they don't see because of the daily hustle. When everything goes right, I mean, it's pretty easy. Being disagreeable when the company is working well is fun. How do you handle things in tough times? For example, I mean, when I look at pharma, it's still COVID. There was this sugar high. Alistair Milton on the podcast said there was the sugar high in 2022, 2021. Money was flowing towards pharma. And then there was this crush right after.
We had the same thing in sectors like alternative protein and so on, where exactly the same as you said, sugar high, okay, without the sugar, and then the period of disillusionment.
How do you handle board dynamics then as an investor when things are really bad?
Yeah, so one of the conversations that's very interesting to have is to explain to entrepreneurs, not to take money when there is plenty of it, okay? And I'll come back to that point where I will contradict myself, okay? But then also to be smart about the valuation that you get, okay? Because one thing that founders are obsessed about is dilution, which is natural and normal, okay? And so they think that the higher the valuation they can get, the better off they will be. At a very abstract level, that's true, okay? But there is a journey to get somewhere, okay? And so the key question to ask yourself is, does my valuation today correspond to what typically a company at this stage of development should be valued at, okay? And this could have a error bar of 50% plus or minus, okay? But it still has to be within reason. Why? Because there's going to be ups and downs in the market, okay? And so maybe now you're getting money at the up period, while the next one might be in the down period, okay? So you may get disappointed, okay? And secondly, there is something called equity story that needs to be coherent across the development of the company that takes 5, 6, 7, sometimes 10 or plus years, okay? And at the end of that story, you need to land at some exit valuation that makes sense, comparatively speaking, to everything else in typically public markets or private markets. So the moment you have a deviation from that, right, you risk, finding yourself in a difficult situation very quickly, okay? And this is self-serving, okay? The ones that typically suffer end up being investors, right? Because the team always needs to be somehow served so that they continue to be motivated, and then investors end up with the short end of that stick. And so that's why explaining to entrepreneurs that sometimes the bigger valuation is not necessarily always the best choice, okay, is a difficult conversation to have, but sometimes an important one. Coming back to the point about taking money or not taking money, okay? When companies are in the process of fundraising, it's often, good to take as much money as they're offered, because tomorrow they may regret not having the extra 2 million that they didn't want to take because they didn't want to get diluted, okay? So that's one perspective. The other perspective is that at the times of sugar high, as you described it, okay, there's just too much, how do I say that nicely? Money that's there thanks to excitement without necessarily rational lens, okay? And then it's better not to take it. Okay, so I know that my 2 points are, in opposition. Okay, but when you think about it rationally, you understand why I'm advocating not to take any money at, situations of high excitement, because it will come back and bite you.
Yeah, uh, yeah, definitely. So this exciting. I mean, I think it was Michael Jackson on LinkedIn. It's also an investor in the UK. He wrote, he always coins this term tourists. So the tourists in the market. When you get them on the board of a company on the cap table, it's really hard to get them out later because they invest at the high when the valuation is really high. And when you cannot sustain this high valuation in a down market and you need to raise money in that, it's just a setup for disappointment for people who don't understand investing and who don't understand the company at the end of the day.
Yeah, and going back to the alternative protein craze period, I mean, we had investors in our funds asking us, "Why aren't you doing any of these investments? Everybody is, doing this or that, because people want to talk about what everybody talks about." Okay, and then when you explain that, well, the valuations are too high, the maturity of the technology is not there, the differentiating factors are not there, therefore we'll sit and wait. Okay, and you actually do sit and wait, and things always come to normal over time, and then you can come in and make some choices.
It's easy said, be a contrarian investor. How do you explain this to your LPs that you don't run after the hypes, but really look at the market segments that are currently not high?
You stick to your guns, basically. If you are consistent in your message, people will understand. They may be disappointed because, like I said, at the end of the day, it's about stories. Okay, so they want to be able to tell stories about what they invested in. Okay, and they get excited by some of these stories. But if you keep the discipline and you make sure that the message is always consistent, it's fine.
I'm curious now, last final point, the final question to the investor founder relationship. Where have you seen this relationship break down in a way that it's really destroyed at the end of the day? What are the pitfalls that people should be aware of to avoid that in the future of building their companies?
I think it goes back to the point that I tried to make earlier, that most of the time, if this relationship is healthy, the opinions are well meant. So people are suggesting certain things because they want the company to succeed. The challenge becomes when entrepreneurs interpret it in a different way. Okay, they think that an investor is proposing something because it serves them. Okay, for whatever reason. Okay, and oftentimes, if communication breaks down and people go into what I would call their own world of contemplation, okay, it leads to negative outcomes in terms of relationships kind of breaking down, conversations not happening, and then disappointment by entrepreneurs thinking that somebody is against me or this or that, without necessarily understanding where certain positions are coming from. So all that to say, and this is of course contrarian to what we see out in the world, we need to have more conversations rather than less.
Yeah, that's a very good point. How do you motivate founders to have more conversations than less when they are overwhelmed already with their day-to-day work?
That's true. And the societal tendency is not to talk, it's to send messages now, okay? Or rely on other things, right? Which doesn't really help in many aspects. Okay, this being just one tiny one at the end of the day. Right?
So it's really face-to-face conversations.
Yeah, and there are positive consequences of that in terms of democracies functioning, people confronting their views, being able to accept other people's views that may not be the same but still being acceptable. Whereas the trend today is leading towards polarization, opinions that are not able to reconcile, and so on, which is driving a lot of negative things in society overall.
So do I understand your advice right? Talk it out, don't text it out.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's move to deep tech realities.
Which is a very old person, position. Okay.
Is it? Is it really?
Oh, well, I mean, I have children that are working, and
Yeah.
they tell me in horror, somebody called me by phone, you know?
Oh, really?
Yeah,
This is so surprising
yeah,
today that
because everything is sold through messaging. So,
yeah, that's true.
yeah.
That's true. Yeah, but it doesn't work at the end of the day. It's just everyone's
Well, I
talking to
mean,
himself.
conversations help, right? But it's an investment as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. When we look at deep tech, I think the public markets, private markets, the last 20 years was all about software, especially with the internet. Mark Andreessen with, I think it was Netscape, his famous product was basically a software product. We have a myriad of apps. And with that, whenever I read about investing, there is this 10x notion. Start a company, sales 6 months, and then in 2 to 3 years, we get the 10x exit. Does it work in deep tech in the same logic?
10x is still there. It takes longer time. Okay, so why is 10x an emblematic, position that we get attacked about many times over? It's a metaphor in some ways, okay?
Mhm.
But it's an important metaphor to understand how venture capital works, and it relates also to sports. So I'll close the loop on that as well. The profile of venture capital investments is such that very few make a lot of money, okay? Some make some money, and a large part makes zero money or loses money, right? And so that's why getting into an investment without the 10x mentality screws up your mathematics from day one. Because every single investment, when you're making it, needs to have a 10x potential. Knowing all the way along that journey that many will never get there, but those that do get have that potential and therefore will compensate for the losses of the ones that don't make it. And so, looking from the outside, this looks like, some greedy capitalists, looking to make 10 times or 100 times money. Okay. But the reality is that exceptional element needs to be ingrained in every single startup you back, knowing that it may not work. And so those that work need to compensate.
Yes, you need the expectation at the end of the day to live. I mean, the truth is, venture capitalists don't invest their own money. They invest other people's money, and they need to return money at the end of the day. Otherwise,
Yes.
it doesn't work. You can't motivate your LPs forward. But does it really work in deep tech? I mean, in practice.
I understand. The truthful answer is the jury is still out. We still have to prove that it actually works. It's a nascent field in many ways, okay? And the timelines are long. It requires capital, but I don't know. Take a company like NVIDIA, okay?
Mhm.
10 years ago, maybe you knew that your GPU in your computer was an NVIDIA chip, but many people didn't even hear about that company, okay? And then all of a sudden, certain things happened in the market, and the company is now the most valuable company in the world, right? So, and is it a deep tech company? Absolutely, because it's a semiconductor company, right? It's a company that develops something in the physical world that you have to actually build and be able to design, produce, and then sell. So in some other spaces that I've been involved with, we still have to prove ourselves, and this is a collective responsibility of everybody in that ecosystem, and this includes startups, investors, bigger investment groups that are giving money to venture capital, but also large companies that are part of that system that allow innovation to be commercialized and eventually create good outcomes for these startups that are successful.
Yeah, at the end of the day, you're building the next game-changing company. NVIDIA is a very good example. I think the success story came basically then overnight in 2024 for many. But when I look at the history of NVIDIA, it was not really clear-cut until 2023, 2024. When they started, I mean, the chips industry is basically a cyclical industry. And in the 90s, it was one graphic cards developer came out with a new card and vanished 2 years after. And when you wanted to buy a replacement, it didn't exist anymore. NVIDIA found a way to become sustainable in that space. And interestingly, then they pivoted completely to an area where everybody said in 2006, this CUDA platform for scientists is really, when scientists don't have money at the end of the day, and they're not willing to pay a lot of capital for graphic cards, gamers do. Why do you pivot? And this laid the foundation, but not in 2006, almost 20 years later, to the economy we have now with artificial intelligence. My question to you is, as a deep tech investor, knowing that this NVIDIA blueprint takes 10, 20, 30 years to fruition, how do you position yourself as a fund with that in mind?
Yeah, so this is an eternal question whether deep tech funds should be longer than 10-year funds.
Mm.
And the answer is, I don't know. The challenge is that the moment something is different from standard, it becomes complicated to be part of an ecosystem. Okay? So it's the same as, when we invest alongside an evergreen fund, okay, that doesn't need to get out. Well, there is already, an asymmetry in interest in terms of creating an exit. Okay, so that's why this is not an issue where you can really make a clear cut what should be the timeline. But then, some of it is understanding how the overall market develops, and I'm sure that there are people that lost money in NVIDIA. There are people that made some money in NVIDIA, and then there are people that made a lot of money in NVIDIA. Okay, and at the end of the day, that's part of the normal cycle, and that's why you have companies that at the end of the day, are successful in the books of some investors, but very unsuccessful in the books of others, depending partly when they bought into them, when in that development cycle or hype cycle, if you want to call it, depending on the position. Okay, you came in. Okay, and that's part of this process. Okay, so part of our responsibility when trying to allocate capital is figuring out is the moment right? Is it too early or too late? Oftentimes we're too early, and it has to be admitted. But sometimes you hopefully get it right.
Two questions come to my mind. So on Sofinnova's fund model, so it's still a traditional model, 10 years. You raise funds, allocate it within 2 to 3 years, and need basically to get out of the story latest at year 10 with a little bit of a period afterward if you need to wind down something or if it takes a little bit more time. But it's the traditional VC model.
This is how industry works.
Yeah. And if you want to follow on, you need to do it with the next fund, basically. If you say, okay, this story is really great.
Okay. So, this is, a lot of people don't understand this. Okay. Normally you form a portfolio in a 3-4 year period. Okay. But you keep significant reserves and you use the reserves to finance the companies that are successful. So now it's a choice of the manager, how they do this, how much do they invest first, and how much do they keep as reserves. But typically for deep tech, you need significant reserves for subsequent financing because it becomes more capitalistic, and sometimes it takes longer than you wanted. Okay, so you need to be able to play, ideally, as long as possible. Sometimes it doesn't work. Okay, so you find yourself without enough capital, even though the company still needs to raise money. So that can be killing your position, or if you manage to keep enough capital, then you can continue following on. But that's kind of the model.
But coming from the company side, for the entrepreneurs who listen to this episode, it still means when I want to present a deep tech case to you, you would be very happy when I can explain the story in a way that I say, look, I mean, when we close the funding round in the next 12 months with you on board, I believe that with the money raised, I can achieve a milestone in 4 to 5 years down the road that has a good potential to deliver a 10x exit for you at this point. So this would be a story that would make you happy as an investor.
Very happy.
Okay, so this is really
Because
effect.
from that story, you need to discount many things, okay? And the two things you discount is time, takes longer, and the return is not as good as as what the entrepreneur wants you to believe.
But still, when quantum computing, for example, quantum computers, where some say it might take 10, 20 years until something comes out, or nuclear fusion until it has commercial viability. It's really hard to, even if it's the best technology and has so much commercial potential in 20 years down the road, it's hard to fit in your funding model like yours at the end of the day when they say it's 20 years. So there must be something before that.
It's true. Okay. There are some things that are just not appropriate for venture capital, and we just have to accept it, right? So I happen to know a fusion company that I've looked at in 2002. It took them until this year to get the liquidity event.
That's 24 years.
24 years.
24 years, really patient, really patient. But in the due diligence, probably it would be off your list at the end of the day, because when you charge and say, okay, 10 years, we need to return something.
Yes, but now this brings us to a very important topic that we didn't talk about, which is how to create exits, okay, and what is the appropriate time to get to those exits, okay? And this is where the deep tech world is still very much handicapped, okay, because we talked about building from science to technology, then demonstrating that at scale, producing, commercializing, and all of that. This is a long road to hoe, but the ones waiting at the end of that road, okay, are expecting a startup to go through all these steps. That's not necessarily the case in other sectors, where rarely do you go to serious production facilities or anything like that. You're often acquired much sooner. And so what we are in a way missing is that ability to create exit points earlier in that journey that would then fit much easier with the venture model, and in a way give a kick to that flywheel that would then help people understand that yes, this is demanded by the market, and it's going to create new companies because people understand how to get down that road. Why aren't we seeing this? Okay, today in deep tech we are not seeing large companies buying startups. It's not common, right? You see that in biopharma, you see that in software. Back in the 90s, we talked about 90s. Cisco had a whole department buying a startup every week. Okay, that was printing business cards, integrating, doing everything. None of these companies that do that expect every single startup they acquire to work 100%. So they almost have a venture capital model inside their way of thinking. But again, they understand that, and I'm not going to say what the number is, 1 out of 5 will work dearly for them, okay? And that's good enough for this model to work. The challenge in the deep tech world is risk appetite, or ability to accept risk and ability to defend situations that don't work. Why? Because at the end of the day, it should be a portfolio approach, right? You have a set of technology gaps, or you expect certain markets to grow where you're not present, and you want to complement that through acquisitions of startups and new technologies. Well, you do that, and then some work, some don't work, but the ones that work bring you so much upside that they compensate for the ones that didn't know. Exactly the same as the math in terms of venture capital. Okay? To get to that level, you need to have management teams that are able to defend a position where some will not work, okay? And that's okay, which is, if you go to pharma world, that's totally fine. Like nobody is going to question leadership of a pharma company that made some acquisitions and some didn't work. Right? It's just part of life, okay? In deep tech, that's much different, okay? And so you need to have that acceptance at board and shareholder level, so that atmosphere then transcends down to M&A activity that picks up and therefore creates a marketplace for these new technologies.
I thought for companies of a certain size, especially public companies in all industries, it's common sense to first, when they realize they have a strategic gap, to first look on the market, acquire something, integrated before building it yourself. And now I hear from you, it's not common in deep tech industries. Why is that? What is your opinion?
That's a billion-dollar question. If I had the answer, I would not be.
I was
I
hoping
would be
for
here,
it.
but I would be charging for my answer. But no, I think there are a couple of challenges. Okay, first of all, if we go back to the name, it's deep tech. Therefore, it's fundamentally built on strong science, and many of these companies have internal R&D departments, right? And so there is a challenge. I would say, with not invented here, right? There is a challenge of accepting that somebody, which is similar to not invented here, that somebody outside might have done something better, okay? And we should actually accept it. And then there is a risk, and this is a real risk. We're talking people again, okay? That, a company needs to question whether internal development is actually the right thing to do, okay? And I think it's wrong to question that, because there is room for internal R&D, okay? And there's a room to complement that with external R&D through acquisitions that together 1 + 1 gives 5, okay? But that's the human nature that comes in the way, in a way, because decisions are never made rational. They're made because of somebody's interest, okay? And so when you think about that, that's a very challenging position for a deep tech company to have. Then we have to face the reality. Companies that are operating in these spaces, they don't have the market multiples that, for example, biopharma has, right? So their currency in the market is not as strong, okay? Which doesn't mean that they shouldn't play, but they just need to play differently, okay? And that part, I suppose, I don't have an answer. Leadership teams have not invested sufficient time to figure out what's the right game plan there and how do you actually play, because if you don't play, you don't win, okay? And so you need to figure out how to play in the startup world so that it's beneficial to you and at the same time feeds this environment so that you continue to grow.
So at the end of the day, you invest in deep tech in an area that has a very long runway anyway. So it's more than 10 years with limited exit windows, because some parts of the industries have not yet today. Yes. Then there is the human element again on the LP side. I can imagine how do you keep your own conviction, the conviction of LPs up, that this will change in the near-term future?
It's not easy, okay? It requires conviction that you're doing the right thing and you're showing positive examples along the way. To date, the reality is that a lot of positive examples are typically related to public markets, so listing companies in public markets, which is not a wrong thing to do, right? But typically, it should not be the majority of liquidity outcomes. This position got me in trouble once. I was speaking on a panel in China, and it was being translated. And I said, IPOs are, in the eyes of VCs, a necessary evil. Okay, and then I said that, and the whole room was, whoa.
Yeah, I believed it.
I have no idea how it was translated to them. Okay, but that position still remains true, because an M&A context is a known environment, right? IPO listing is something where there's a lockup period. You don't know how the markets will react. You don't know how the company will behave in public markets. So it's a lottery ticket. Okay, it can go well, okay, but it can also go badly.
Yeah, and then you always have this interesting development that many companies are overvalued before the IPO on the private markets and the private AI, for example. I mean, OpenAI and Anthropic, they now pride themselves with extremely high valuations,
Yeah.
but the only exit window they have really open now is the IPO market at the end of the day, because like for the
Well,
acquisition, it's too
everything else
high.
is prohibited, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah, yeah.
this goes back to our discussion some time ago around, how chasing the valuation basically
Mm.
closes some of the doors for companies, right? I mean, in the AI case, it's extreme, right? But it's equally true in other sectors, depending on the valuation.
But let's dwell a little bit on this point, IPO, and why the room in China was, ooh, why is IPO such a negative thing for VCs? Coming from M&A way back in the early 2000s, um, there's one observation that I had, that when a company prepares for an IPO, um, very often, in my personal opinion, the roadshow, the publicity connected to it, and all this energy that is set free on the market when trying to hook up investors for the IPO, also steers up very often incumbents, the big companies, and makes them curious about, what happens when they come to the market. So what I personally think have observed on the market is that many acquisitions happens around IPO. So company prepares for an IPO, a bigger company gets steered up and thinks, could be a competitor. Would it be much nicer to acquire it before they go public, to not risk have another one eating our cake? Um, I'm surprised that you as a VC say IPO is not my favorite route to go. Why is that?
No, okay, this is a general statement because it is a step into unclear future. Okay. And
Mm,
the key elements are what's called the lockup period. So just to explain for people
yeah.
that don't know, okay, typically the shares that are registered for public offering cannot be traded for 6 months. Okay? And then after 6 months, the lockup period expires and they can be traded. So
Mm,
the consequence of that is that a uh, 6 months is a very long period, okay, as we see all the time. Okay, many
mm,
things can happen.
yeah.
So things can happen in the business of the company that you don't necessarily control. Okay, so therefore the stock can react positively or negatively. Okay, then things can happen in the overall environment, geopolitical or whatever the case might be, that can again affect how this stock performs. Okay, and so I know that for people it's seducing to talk about companies that did an IPO and all of that, but when you have an M&A transaction, you sign an agreement and the cash is in the bank the next day. Okay, and it's not moving anywhere. From a predictability point of view, that's a much safer outcome than exposing yourself to public markets, which could be lucrative. Far from that, okay, but come with certain risks.
Let me sum it up in a hopefully funny way. And if I understand you right, the job of a VC is investing in early stage technology and teams that have a high risk and uncertainty that they will produce anything useful someday in the future. The likelihood of them failing is higher than of them succeeding, and you manage it over building a portfolio. But at the end of the day, it's really high risk, high uncertainty. This is where VCs thrive, except the exit. The VCs prefer the certainty of an acquisition compared to the uncertainty of the stock market.
Yeah, you can think of it that way.
Yeah.
Uh, why? Probably because it remains in the private realm, right?
Mm, mm.
Because we are much more
That's the
attuned
point.
operating in private transactions
Mm.
than figuring out how markets will react and think about it.
That's the point. It's a different game. It's not basketball
Yeah,
anymore. It's probably scuba diving. So it's completely a different game. It's
yeah,
the skills that you acquired you cannot use in another game.
absolutely.
Yeah, this makes sense. This makes sense. How how does an acquisition work for a VC? What's your point? When do you get out of the process?
Or you're part of that process all the time.
Mm,
I mean, in many ways, by networking, you are informing acquirers that there is a startup that's at this point in time, and it's probably ready that the companies should talk to them. Then you are trying to, again, market the story, right? And then eventually you are part of the discussion on the terms and everything else that sets up the agreements.
So to sum this part up before we move forward to rant a little bit about Europe and circle back to the beginning of the conversation before we wrap it up. So for the entrepreneurs, it means presenting a development risk is fine. Presenting a commercial risk, a team risk, having gaps in the org chart, it's absolutely fine. And investor buys into it, but to really get you on board with the storytelling early in the conversations, it would be helpful if they have some ideas how they can create an exit via an acquisition route, or, for example, have already the contact, have perceive a need in the industry, understand how the industry works, rather than promoting an IPO as their preferred exit route.
Yeah, it's easy to say we'll exit from an IPO. That's for sure.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, I mean, Christoph Lengauer said it in an earlier podcast we talked in 2021. He said, you cannot sell a company. Companies are acquired. So final question to this acquisition part is, how do you make it happen if you can't sell a company?
Well, it's about being sufficiently known and creating this, need for somebody to actually say, well, I don't want others to have their hand in this.
There's
and
a
comes
lot
back again, partly to communication.
Yeah, communication and storytelling. So these are really the key skills. Otherwise, when we come to Europe now, I mean, you know the United States, you know Canada, you know Europe, you operate in both ecosystems, you also know China. Where do you see Europe's strengths and weaknesses for entrepreneurs and venture capitalists?
So Europe has a phenomenal R&D base. Both university and public institutes constitute an incredible position to build on. I would also say, and this is from personal experience, that the new generations of entrepreneurs or people with strong technical background have an inclination stronger than before to become entrepreneurs. They need to be helped. They need to be helped in a way by creating conditions that we see, actively or proactively being done in many different countries, but also on the European level, both legislative and in terms of availability of financing. So these conditions are there and are helpful today to see a thriving scene in deep tech, in particular, in many different places in early stages. Okay, so a lot of companies get started, which is good because that creates a lot of learning, and we can come back to that. Learning is very important. Even if you don't succeed, you learn a lot. Okay, and this is one of the challenges of Europe, which is that the mindset of failure is not necessarily embraced is not the appropriate word, because there's no reason to celebrate failure. Okay, but it's about rationally understanding what have you learned from an experience, and then how do you use that to become better next time. And this is where sports is a phenomenal analogy, because if you spend days crying over a lost match, you better quit and stop doing that any further. Okay, you have to figure out, why did you lose the previous match? What can you do better? And then you go and hopefully win the next one. Okay, and that's how you perpetuate your success, or end up on the 52% side as Roger Federer and not below 50%. And so that's one of the challenges in Europe. The other challenge in Europe is as companies grow, and in particular when they need significant amounts of capital in deep tech for deployment, this is where there are fewer sources of funding. There is a significant effort now being put in place, spearheaded by a number of financial institutions and European Investment Bank, that is hopefully coming to close sometime this month for a big multi-billion euro scale-up fund. So if that's in place, that's a good first step towards making sure that there is scale-up capital available in Europe. But solution is not just single fund. Okay, there needs to be abundance of scale-up capital that allows these companies to reach maturity and ideally not run somewhere else to do their industrialization, but remain in Europe.
Why do you think it is important for Europe to keep the companies here for the industrialization phase and not let them just wander off to the United States and say, okay, we brought them through kindergarten and now let them walk into the next stage in the United States?
Two answers, okay? Because you will capture more value. Otherwise, we become a museum. And I don't think we want to be a museum.
Yeah, so the way that they then move to the United States and come back later with their product is not satisfying for you.
No, okay. I don't know. Where do you make that cutoff? But let's say the company develops something and moves to a different geography, then we will have, I don't know, 100 million in value. I'm inventing numbers, right? When they commercialize and start bringing 100 million in profits per year, this is way more value at the end of the story, right? Because at each new step, the value creation increases, right? And so if we are only, and I will push the envelope, the factory of ideas or maybe R&D, okay, that doesn't pay as much as actually being somebody who is able to bring it to the end and commercialize.
I totally agree to what you say. I mean, when I'm on an executive board, I do really not care if we move to the United States or stay in Europe. At the end of the day, I have to go where the capital flows and where I can grow the company, because the survival of the company and the growth of the company is my real goal.
That's a fiduciary responsibility, right?
Yeah. But from a taxpayer perspective, I completely agree to what you say, because when I look at Europe across the board, we invest a lot of tax money at university level, spin it out in startups, invest a lot of taxpayers' money in the startup world. And then from an operator perspective, I always see the gap from Series A onwards. I mean, I can't finance a company, a deep tech company or biopharma company very well in Europe post Series A. Even with this new fund initiative, I think there's not enough capital on the market. How can we change that in Europe, that especially for this value creating phase, Series B, Series C, Series D, up to IPO acquisition, that we have a breeding ground for scale-ups?
So one unresolved challenge, and I don't have a recipe for success, is we still have fractionalized capital markets, okay? If I push to the extreme, every single country wants to have a stock market, okay? So by definition, okay, the bigger the country, the bigger the stock market, but a small country will then have a small stock market, okay? Which doesn't mean it's dysfunctional, okay? But it doesn't create critical mass of many things that are important for success. And what are those things? Okay, first of all, it's large pools of capital that can actually support ambitious stories. Second, it's knowledgeable people behind those pools of capital that can put their finger on something that they think is the future. Therefore, very deep understanding of a particular topic. If you are operating in a small market, you don't have the luxury of developing expertise in every single vertical. So you are a generalist, okay? And so we don't want to be a collection of generalists. We want to have a ideally single capital market with many experts on different topics that could be in different places, but therefore we know that, I don't know, it's not specific to this story, okay? Luxury goods expertise is in France and Italy, okay? So we don't need to develop that in Copenhagen, okay? In Copenhagen, we'll have, industrial biotech expertise thanks to success of Novozymes, Christian Hansen, and so on. Okay? Novonesis today, okay? So all of these things are very important for ability of the continent that has a huge common market, okay, to succeed together. Because otherwise, we continue, in a way, competing between different countries instead of embracing this ability to have a common market and function as one entity in the capital markets.
Yeah, I totally agree. And how can we motivate policymakers that they create the right environment for private companies actually to finally invest in scale-ups?
This is not my expertise, okay?
Yeah.
So I'll preface anything I say that it's not my expertise. I think the job of the government is to create conditions. It's not necessarily to intervene in the markets. However, okay, I say that, but I follow with the following statement, okay? It could be the job of the government to catalyze certain markets because they bring better future to the common market. So that is something that's high responsibility in the sense that it asks from somebody to make choices, okay? And typically, policymakers are much more comfortable spreading the wealth in a very even manner rather than making that being called later on when something doesn't work. Okay, so today, what is it? Almost 20 years later, okay, everybody talks about American solar company that got, I think, 500 million loan secured by Obama government, okay, and went bust, okay. But nobody talks about 25 other companies that took a loan, returned the loan, and created significant value through equity investment to the government, because that's life, okay? Unfortunately, in the political world. So at some point, we have to live with we as a society, with our choices and support them and stick to them, okay? One of the biggest challenges overall is different cycles that influence certain decisions, be it, in the commercial world, a quarterly cycle of reporting for public companies. In the political world, an election cycle where people are not comfortable making long-term commitments beyond an election cycle, and therefore that shortens our ability to stick to some long-term positions that we see working well in some other places.
What I find so fascinating when I look at Europe now in my early 50s, and when I think back to the 90s, I always had the feeling Europe is winning, and at least at par with the United States. So my indicators were automotive industry in the 90s, 80s, 90s, especially the German industry, also the French industry or Scandinavian industry, Italy. EXA is, for example, one of the public holding companies that still comes from Fiat, from the Italian company. When I think about the mobile industry, in my opinion, the mobile revolution started in Europe. Europe was one of the biggest contributors. The World Wide Web was invented in Switzerland, and I think the decision by the CERN Institute to put it in the public domain and not sell it via a startup or demand everybody to get a license created the success stories of Amazon and Alphabet and made the internet as we know it today possible. Europe was strong. And for some reason that they still don't fully understand, especially Silicon Valley in the United States, they also are a democracy. They also have this boom and bust cycles. They also have these democratic cycles of 4 or 5 years elections. Silicon Valley took off, while Europe, especially after the crash in 2000, really stifled almost every innovative industry and could not catch up with the depression after the big stock market crash in 2000. Did you find some explanation why the US overcame this big disaster in 2000 so fast? I mean, fast. The Nasdaq took 15 years to make up from the 2000 high. It was until 2015 that we saw a new all-time high in the Nasdaq. But what's your explanation? What's your interpretation that Europe seems to be still a little bit stuck from this 2000 crash?
I think it goes back to mentality, okay? And the mentality, if you single out the US, is we talked a little bit about embracing failure, for lack of a better word, okay? But understanding how learnings from past failures can, bring success, okay? But the key difference between US and Europe is new world versus old world, okay? New world is, by definition, pick your period, doesn't matter, a pioneering effort, okay? People go and are still attracted going to the new world so that they can realize their dreams. Because the environment is such that it helps them drive their ambitions. Okay, we are in Europe much more cautious, and when you look at recent economic success, what's the most successful country in the last 20 years in Europe? Poland, right? Because it allowed people after many years of tough life to actually express themselves through entrepreneurship, and a lot of things took off in Poland today to become a very successful big economy in Europe. That's an unprecedented success.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then the contradiction is still is China in my eyes. When I traveled to China in 2014, it was already in 2014, it was such a huge difference from what I remembered from school, from the late 80s, early 90s, and what I saw, I mean, especially in the big cities in Beijing or Shenzhen, was really looking to the future. Now it's even more impressive. You also experienced China. What's your interpretation? What makes China closer to the United States when it comes to the development speed than Europe?
I mean, it's fascinating what happened to China, okay? And I'm not skilled enough to have a comprehensive answer of how that worked, okay? But what is interesting is that, and to your point, the speed of development is even faster there, okay?
Yeah.
Because there is a notion that you need to try different things, right? And if they work, they'll take off relatively quickly, okay? And that helps feed of itself this mentality of entrepreneurship, right? Where people see, the joke in the deep tech world is that if you see your colleague professor driving a Ferrari, well, that's probably because they succeeded in a startup, okay, not because they were good researchers, right? And so, when you see role models and facility to start new businesses with technology and bring them to scale with the help of the environment, and the environment there is helpful, and I have no expertise to dissect how that help from different levels of government works out in China. But the end results is people taking initiative and quickly failing or quickly succeeding to get on to the next one, okay? And that creates a very engaging environment that infects, for lack of a better word, others with the entrepreneurial spirit or virus.
Yeah, we need to activate it a little bit more in Europe and also talk about failure. I like your points about Roger Federer. So, I mean, 52 to 48, I think you mentioned, was his success criteria, that he didn't win everything, every point, but it was a very, very fine line. And looking at the startup world through that lens, it makes it obvious that the startup has a chance of success of less than 10% and 90% failure chance, and we should be a little bit more gracious to that. When you look at your career, are there also investment decisions where you say your initial instinct was not right? How did you deal with that situation when you have to realize it doesn't work?
Well, many did not work, okay? And many will not work in the future, okay? We started talking about scientists working in venture capital and all of that. It's a difficult situation to find yourself in, where you invest many years of hard work and support for some of these companies that then don't work out, okay? And then we have to define what not working out means here. We talked about the option where these companies continue their journey and you have to divest for a number of reasons. In some other cases, they basically shut down, okay? And it's in human nature to kind of try to think about these moments as not successful ones. But I think a better way to look at it is, what can we learn from those lessons, and how do we ideally avoid these mistakes in the future? Okay. Again, this is not easy, far from that, because in addition to financial loss, which is an important one, there are people involved, right? And there are people that tomorrow don't have a job, or a company shuts down, and so all of these things are related and create a situation that's not easy to live with, but VCs are somehow vaccinated, if I can say so, better against those situations, and hopefully come out of that on the other end with continued enthusiasm and optimism about the ones that survive. I see occasionally colleagues that come from other parts of life in different boards and so on, who live those moments with a little bit more difficulty. Okay, and I can associate with that. I can appreciate with that. It doesn't mean that I've developed thick skin. It's more that I've developed an ability to kind of appreciate the learnings that come, okay, and kind of move on from there. But it's never easy.
I think what you mentioned is one of the biggest success principles of successful companies. My opinion, Reed Hastings in his book, No Rules, Rules, described it best with Sunshine Faya at Netflix. But also when I look into the leadership style of Jensen Huang at NVIDIA, also in Amazon, I think this is one of the principles to sunshine Faya, talk about it, reason with people, what did you learn, and also help other people to avoid these failures. And I completely agree, we should keep that. We're coming to the end of our conversation. I have a handful of questions left. First question to you is there anything open that you would like to talk about before we wrap it up?
No, I think we went over a lot of different topics, touched upon this whole venture capital world, then relationship with entrepreneurs, and also how hopefully we can turbocharge Europe's future, because I think there is a collective responsibility there. And going back to, if you don't play, you don't win. I think one needs to understand is that by getting involved, you are actually contributing to the end result. By sitting on the sidelines or in the audience, you're just a passive observer. Okay, and that goes for many other things we do in life. Again, so if there is one message is get going and get involved rather than complaining from the sidelines. Which is a sport that some people like to practice.
Yeah, completely agree. Then my final three questions. It's more a intuitive round. If you could implant one principle into the mind of every European founder to make Europe more successful, what would that principle be?
Do not be afraid.
And the same for investors in Europe?
Maybe almost the same message, right? Do not be afraid to go on the limb, because most likely you will get rewarded.
And final question for the audience, 6 months from now, if someone remembers only one sentence from this conversation, what should that sentence be? So
I would use a verse from an Austrian poet, Rainer Maria Rilke, okay, that in my language says the following. Ja živim u kruzima koji se šire I njima sve više dohvatit žudim. Ja možda neću polučit zadnji krug, ali ja se trudim. In a loose English translation, it would be, I live in circles that continue to expand. I may not reach the final one, but I'm trying hard.
That's a very good quote for this conversation and to remember. Joško, thank you very much for this conversation. I enjoyed every minute of it and learned a lot of new things. And I wish you and your family and your team at Sofinnova all the best for the future.
Likewise, thank you very much for the opportunity and for insightful questions and conversation.
Have a great day. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.